All right, so Dharma, Steven, it was great seeing you guys a couple of weeks ago in Austin. We toured a bunch of sites, saw a lot of what you were doing. We drove through some cornfields. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We
Right.
we had our horns up as we went, right?
With the
Going for
rental car?
national championship in the
Rental car through the cornfields?
Oh, we had from 4-wheel drive going. That was fun.
That's
But,
great. I mean, and don't forget the multi-billion-dollar Samsung plant in the middle of all those cornfields.
Yeah.
That was the
Yeah, how many square feet is that thing going to be?
I don't know, but it's supposed to be bigger than the Tesla building by the time it's done.
Well, that's 10 million.
Yeah, it's monstrous.
Did they let you just drive around that one willy-nilly? No, you got to
on their land.
Yeah.
It's
Cool. Well, yeah. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. So you guys are you're in Houston right now.
That's
You're
right.
doing a lot of deals in Austin, Texas as well.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are. Yep. Houston and Austin are the primary markets, and we're enough to keep us busy. Houston's a massive city, as you guys know. So, we're really expanding here. In Austin, we have maybe about 13 deals covering the greater MSA. So yeah, we're busy.
Very cool. Well, yeah. Well, thanks for spending some time today. So how did you get started in Houston first, or you get started in Austin first?
Well, it's we did get started in Houston, but when I got started in real estate, we were doing a few smaller flips, and married my wife, who was an architect, started building homes, and so it was kind of opportunistic. We did some in Houston, we did some in Austin, but really the bigger deals, the land development deals that we started doing, we scaled in Austin, and now we're scaling in Houston. So it was by virtue of the timeline of how Austin was booming over the last 5 years, and we've really significantly scaled there. And along the way, we started picking up more deals in our, home turf as well in Houston. So it's kind of both running in parallel, but I think Austin had the lead in general.
Yeah. So you're actually building and selling the houses in Houston?
No, right now what we do, we were building and selling the houses, and those were one-off spec homes. But where we're mostly focused now is single-family residential master plan communities and subdivisions where we don't really build a house. We acquire land in high growth areas that are kind of drive to qualify markets, 45 minutes generally. If you look at Houston, out of the city, downtown, and we work on entitling it for anywhere from 500 to a few thousand homes in each subdivision, and we work on putting in the infrastructure, the roads, streets, water, wastewater, and then sell the lots to the home builders. So the home builders in turn purchase the lots, and then they build the homes on it. Somebody like a David Weekley, for instance.
So you guys are joking around about driving through cornfields. There's all this land right now is cornfields.
A lot of it, yes.
On many of them, yes. Yeah. So the one that he's referring to is about 125 acres of cornfield. So, yeah.
So that model right now, so you've bought the land, but you guys aren't growing the corn, right? Are you leasing that land to right now?
Yeah, we lease it to a farmer in order to get agriculture exemptions, because
on property taxes. Just for those that aren't in Texas, property taxes are fairly high, so the ag exemption effectively eliminates the property tax, or vastly reduces it.
Yes, but as long as you're doing actual agriculture work.
That's right.
That's good.
So let's just make up numbers on 150 acres. If you didn't have the ag exemption, roughly what would it be? And then with the ag exemption, I remember you guys saying it was like hundreds of dollars a year, like $200 or $300 or $400 a year of annual property taxes
versus anywhere between 1.5% and 3% of the assessed value of their property annually. So it's a huge, depending upon the size or value of the asset, that is a huge delta just in annual property taxes.
So about $300,000 on a property that's about 150 acres in general, without going into numbers, versus $500 a year. So that's the delta that we're talking.
Yeah, it's a big value add.
That really just makes it even possible. Without that,
yeah, you wouldn't be doing
it. It's got to be the numbers has got to be really hard to make that work.
Yeah.
Right.
Dharma, real quick. I know we dove right in, but I love to hear more of the background. Like, you moved to this country as an adult, and now fast forward, you have thousands of acres of land in really the biggest growing metro areas in the entire country. How did you go? Like, you arrived here from India, and like, tell us like kind of that path.
Yep. I mean, thanks. I arrived here like I think most other immigrants, and had a consulting job, and $2,000 in my pocket as a loan, and uh, worked my way up for the first few jobs, and landed a pretty large gig in with Deloitte and Touche, and had done multiple things for them, and including consulting on large infrastructure projects, all of which really contributed to my understanding of of the business, how business is done, plus how real estate works. And on the side, I was always kind of finding my own small little deals to flip and whatnot. And as an immigrant, the hardest thing is, especially an Indian immigrant, the hardest thing is to get your green card and get naturalized in the country, and that's a long process. So as I was going through that process, and once I realized that it was time that I could launch out on my own, I actually was able to cut the cord and start my business and dive right into real estate and land development. And up until that time, there was some amount of moonlighting, of course, without compromising my work at the time. So it was a very interesting, very learning, rewarding journey, I would say, up until this point, where you really see, you get to experience multiple levels of call it lifestyles and living standards in the country, and it really gives you an appreciation of how people live at all levels. So
How long did that whole process take from coming to the US and then going through the green card process and all this?
The funny thing is, I came here 16 years ago. I got my green card 7 years ago, and I got my citizenship a few weeks ago. So that's really
Yeah.
that's a pretty, and I would say that even is a fairly accelerated timeline for an Indian immigrant in this country today.
Well, congratulations. That's awesome. But
Thank you.
15 years is not, that's some commitment right there. So yeah, very cool. So thanks for sharing that. And Dharma and Steven, when did you guys meet up in that process?
So I've for the past 20 years, I've worked for home builders, overseeing land acquisition and land development internal to those operations. I decided to strike out on my own. I was meeting with potential investors, one of which was a former boss of mine. And he was talking to Dharma and said, "You should really talk to this guy. He's doing a lot of stuff. I think it'd be a good fit for you. And he's busy and he needs help." And so it was really that simple. I reached out to Dharma. We had a great couple of conversations, and then I quickly turned to, "Hey, how can I help you? And how can we work together?" And then so that's how we ended up together. Just word of mouth and connections at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But we did not know each other previously. Ironically, when I was at a prior job, someone who worked for me was talking to him on a particular deal, but I had not met Dharma actually.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, so Dharma, I mean, 15 years, that's impressive in itself. When we look at these land deals that you're doing now, you've got a couple thousand acres around the Austin territory. How long is it really taking you? You're going from identifying an opportunity to getting the site plan laid out and doing all that groundwork. I mean, that's even before home can even be considered.
Yeah, it's a it's a very interesting process. I mean, it typically takes us about 2 years to go through what we call an entitlement process. I mean, of course, identifying the right piece of land is really crucial, and we typically like to find stuff. And me personally, because up until this point, I've done a lot of the acquisitions. I like to find stuff on the path of progress. So anywhere where we see, a major freeway following a major transportation plan, a major, something like a Samsung announcement in Texas, or something like um, a Tesla moving into Austin, So we're typically following those kinds of big events, but we're also following, what are the expansion plans for the local airport? What are the freeway expansion plans? So on and so forth. So starting from there, the entitlement process is everything from really understanding the dynamic of how the city works, how the county works, what the local regulations are, ensuring that you have the right attorneys in place, and engineers on tow, and just working through the highest and best use of what the property is fit for. So it's a 2-year process, and it adds significant amount of value to the property.
And I would just add a couple of things real quickly. I mean, yes, all the things that Dharma said, but there is the physical aspect of the property too. Not all properties are equal. All the things that people take for granted when they're either in their home or in a building for that matter, they don't just happen. We have to make sure that it can be served with water and sewer. And here in Houston in particular, but most areas, how can we drain the site? So all those are physical attributes that are affected not only by the physical setting within which it sits, but also the governing rules and regulations, because they do vary widely from city to city, from county to county, even those that are adjacent to one another. And sometimes if you're in a city, in a county, there's just layers of government that do significantly impact the viability of a track. So you definitely have to know, I call it, you got to know the rules of the game. You can't walk onto a basketball court expecting to play a game of football. It just doesn't work out very well. Yeah. So you definitely have to look at those things, and all of that has to be done in an economical way. That's the challenge, right?
Are you finding that the cities and counties in state at times, right, are they inviting you in, saying, hey, I found all this acreage, I want to invest in it? Like, are they saying, hey, yes, we'd love to have you, or are they more standing in the way? Like, we're working with a city right now, and they literally have above their door, we're a rural community and we intend to keep it that way.
No, all of the above. It just depends on, that's part of the investigative process, and that is sometimes an overlooked aspect when you're doing a project, but you do have to ask yourself, can we work with this jurisdiction, or is this jurisdiction willing to work with us? Because I think that's one of the things that people don't understand about land development. It is incredibly regulated, particularly when it comes to housing, and we can get into more as to why later. But there are layers of government. It takes a long time. There is significant risk, regulatory risk. It can change, administrations can change, rules change. And then generally speaking, the smaller the city, the less fluid those rules are, because a lot of them aren't set up for it. Like if you're in, say, Harris County, which we sit, it's one of the largest counties in the country. They have very established rules, policies, procedures, and they have an apparatus in place to deal with that. But if you go to a city like Prairie View, for example, which we're in and you know about, they don't have a lot of development there. And so there's often an element of education along the way. It takes time. They're fearful a lot of times about what can happen. And one good example, I mean, I literally had a city tell me this one time. It was a relatively small city. And we were doing, it was about a 500 lot subdivision. And the mayor sat there and looked at me and said, well, you understand that, 5 votes can swing an election in this town. And we only have 1,000 registered voters. And if you're about to put 500 houses in here, I mean, we would literally double their electoral map. So I mean, literally, sometimes it's as simple as that. People are in power and they don't want to lose power. And they have but a lot of them do actually have a civic mind and they want growth and they want to provide housing for whomever, or in the case of non-residential, they want to create jobs. We have a few cities like that they don't want residential, they want commercial activity. And
Right.
there's all sorts of reasons for that too. But
so you say it takes 2 years to kind of get the plan together. That doesn't include like actually doing the physical improvements though to the land.
correct. That gives you a playbook about what you're about to do and or establishes the rules to allow you to do that. Because sometimes we have to go and get it rezoned or create zoning, and there's all sorts of different names for it. But basically, to have the right to do what you want to do, and then again, simultaneously with that, we're trying to figure out and assessing, by the way, each step of the way while we're talking to the city or county or whomever it may be about this is what we want to do. Will you allow us to do it? We're also trying to figure out, can we physically do it? And can we physically do it economically? So sometimes those overlap, it just depends on how big you foresee the risks. And that's where experience comes into, hey, know the rules, know what you're dealing with, and just being able to identify some of these sooner rather than later.
Yeah. One of the things Josh and I were talking about when we look at our deals, like we're taking a lot of commercial product and trying to convert it to something else, trying to occupy it. But we have to get started on our process earlier and earlier in the deal. So even as soon as we basically have a deal, we're even close to under contract, we've got to start spending money on
Real
that
money.
plan so we can like get the ball rolling and keep it timely. So how long are your kind of contract terms you guys are looking at? Like, is it long contracts, but you got to start spending money day one, or do you close before you're really spending money on a project?
Well, I'll speak to what we want to do. Obviously, every seller and every transaction is unique, but certainly we try to structure it enough. So I would say it depends. So in Austin and Houston are two very different markets. Everyone thinks they're in Texas. They're very different in almost every way. So in Houston, buying a raw piece of dirt, you will generally get somewhere between 90 and 180 days of feasibility. Sometimes you can get extensions and pay for those extensions, call it 10 grand a month or something to that effect. Until you get certain answers. And sometimes those are written into the contract and they're specified exactly what they are. Like here in Houston, for example, a drainage report that's been reviewed and approved by an agency would be a key closing condition. Sometimes you get that, sometimes you don't. It just depends on your seller and how sophisticated or in a hurry they are. So it does vary widely. And just for reference, a drainage study would be somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000 and 6 to 9 months. And that's one thing that we do, and we're doing multiple things. So you have to have confidence in the site, or you should have confidence in the site before you put it under the contract. Because you generally are going to be spending some fairly significant dollars that you may just walk away from.
What I found interesting when we were touring the sites, we went from, and this was in North Austin, we went from one site, I think it was in Elgin, that you guys were talking about building 3rd to quarter acre lots and pretty high density homes. So maybe 15 miles down the road.
Leander, where we were having acre lots, and then
exactly. Compared to Leander, which was 15 minutes down the road, maybe 20 minutes down the road, it was 1 acre lots. It's pretty, and I mean, at the end of the day, it was land was land, but the different communities required different sizes.
Right. Well, some of that has to do with the things that we talked about earlier, access and or cost to gain access to sewer, for example. And maybe Dharma can speak to Leander, but generally, if you're here in Texas anyway, you go to an acre lot. And again, this does vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but as a general rule, if you're on an acre lot, you can do a septic system and you don't have to have sanitary sewer. Anything less than that, you have to have sanitary sewer. So generally speaking, if you see an acre lot, you're not going to have a city or a municipal sewer services.
Yeah. Utilities is the biggest, is a big thing, that the big one that drives density of lots and you know, how big they are. But just to go back on one point to your question, Dave, on the time frame for acquisition, you know, sometimes it's also a function of the deal we get, you know, in a competitive market right now. And I say right now because land has been in Houston continues to remain strong and competitive, you know, even through the last 12, 18 months. It's really hard to find good, productive, usable, developable acreage at the right prices. And so when you find that one deal, there's 5 people ready to take it down. So, you know, it also comes down to terms, right? When we find that one piece that's great and we feel good about it, sometimes, you know, we don't spend a year contracting on it. You know, it might be 6 months, right? So really comes down to where we really want to be in. Is it a position we want? And, you know, it also shows that if it's that competitive, when you acquire it, you know, your downside is very little, right? You've got a lot of people, you know, if you ever want to resell it, right? So
Yeah.
so that's the thing about this business that we love is, you know, you buy right, you're already in the money, you know, and you're making money from day one. It's not technically producing revenue from day one, but you know, the fact that you're buying into the money is great from day one. So
yeah. So you've got, say, 6 to 12 months of going through a contracting period. Then you've got 2 years of put the whole plan together and, you know, get it rolling.
I'd say the 2 years includes the contract period.
Includes the contract.
Yeah, you start on day one.
That's the idea anyway. That's what we hope to do.
And we've done it in a few places, but you know, we want to do more. Ideally, you want to spread more while you're under contract. But you know, if you're spending, you know, $500,000 on a site while you're under contract, you're also kind of pot committed at that point. You know, you're going to try to take it down and you know, do that. But it's always good to have the option. But yeah.
And by the way, certain contracts require you to give the seller all that stuff that you did if you walk away. So that's also sometimes a heavily negotiated term, just in and of itself.
So what happens? So the 2 years is done. You've got your whole plan and it's ready to go. And then you're starting to create the land and get the roads put in and get to work.
That's right. Basically. So it depends on, you know, every deal is different. So sometimes we're having to build a water plant or a sewer plant. I mean, those in and of themselves take a year to build, roughly speaking. So you
guys don't use the septic pond structure in Texas, which is just open water ponds of sewage?
No, not at all.
Greenleaf is the largest owner of open septic ponds in the state of
really?
Georgia. We own 7.
Wow. Irrigation septic, huh?
I need to learn more about that.
Yeah, we get a gold star every year. Gold star from the EPA every single year.
Oh,
no, that was obviously something they're not doing right now. But maybe back in like the 60s and 70s, old mobile home parks had septic ponds that were filtered, you know, open air systems, which is like, it's one way of doing things, right? There's always multiple avenues to go. So, but yeah, so I mean, building one of those septic systems in a treatment center, that's intense.
Yeah. I don't know. A small one would be 5 million, something like that.
Oof.
So, yeah.
So,
I mean, you got to be, that's why not a lot of people do this, right? At the end of the day, I mean, it's, you know, but the rewards, obviously, you know, the risk reward factor does hopefully come into play. So,
yeah. So when we went out to Leander, the roads were in, the curves were in, the lots were divided, the signs were up in the yards for all the home. I think there were 3 or 4 home builders in that community.
That's
right.
And
it looked, I mean, it was very showy. Like, you know, the community had the kind of walls up on the exterior of the community with its branding. It showed really, really well for empty lots. And then the plan was basically the home builders would then sell a spec home or sell a custom home, right? Lot by lot.
Yeah. So how it works generally, and forgive me, Darn, this is what I did for the last 20 years. So in that case, those are all contracted to be bought by a production home builder. And in that case, they're taking all the lots down in one transaction. So as soon as we get it officially blessed by the city in that case. They have so many days to close their lots. All say in round numbers, there's 100 lots in that section. All 100 lots will be bought. We will get the revenue for the 100 lots. And then now they have those lots and they will do both. They will start building what they call spec homes and build some spec homes and hope to sell them, you know, right at or prior to finishing them. And then they will also say, at that price point, the higher the price point, the less spec home and the more what we call a dirt sale in the industry. The customer can pick their plan from that home builder, and then they go and build it for them. And so, you know, they have their duration is based on their sales pace.
Very cool.
Well, I was just gonna say, you know, you mentioned EPA, but we deal with the TCEQ here quite a bit, Texas Commission for Environmental Quality. And that's who we go to. I mean, other than a septic spray field, if we're trying to get a discharge permit for wastewater, it's actually, you know, assessing the site. It's assessing, you know, what's the right location to put it, how much you would discharge, how it would be treated, and, you know, what are the points of discharge. And then you go through a whole application process, sometimes anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on, you know, the site and the conditions and protests and whatnot. So, you know, we're familiar with that process, and septic is many times nowadays a temporary solution in some developments. But of course, unless you're going to, you know, larger lots where it's like what you saw, Josh and Leander, it's just not feasible to, you know, to do a wastewater treatment plant, or the city wouldn't accept us to go lower density, you know. But then otherwise we try to do those kind of, you know, that's kind of running your own sewer, right? Because that's what the cities have. Well, if you're connecting to a city sewer, ultimately they have a wastewater treatment plant, right? So in this case, a lot of our projects, the plan is to go out and do this sort of wastewater discharge treatment plant.
So the Waller deal that we did together, you know, was that about 3-4 months ago? And that's basically between Austin and Houston. You know, the status, or the money that we basically fundraised together was, you know, you acquire the land. It's kind of that we're kind of in that 2-year entitlement process, and basically to go horizontal.
That's right.
Basically put the curbs in, put the infrastructure in, and then to basically get to the point that you can sell off the lots individually.
That's right.
To kind of relate back to the deal that we did together to kind of what you're explaining here.
Yeah, no, totally. And so, you know, I can give you the 30,000 feet, and Steven's got a lot of the details because he's been in all the council meetings. You know, we acquired the land, and the plan was to annex into the city of Prairie View, which is in Waller, and you know, do 40 and 50 foot wide lots with 120 foot depth. So they're approximately 5,000 and 6,000 square feet lots, right? You get about 4 or 5 lots an acre type of deal. And we have been working on a development agreement, which is kind of a negotiation, you know, document with the city that stipulates that we were going to go do our own wastewater treatment plant on the site, and we share some of the capacity over what we need. We oversize that sum. We share the capacity with the city. The city gives us water from their existing line, which is right at our site. And so, you know, before we acquired the site, we had it under contract for about 9 months, and our diligence was primarily to ensure that it was utilities at site, or we had a game plan for utilities. That's usually the biggest thing. And then the second thing is that, hey, will the city work with us to give us what we need, or will they you know, potentially be a roadblock? And then if they were a roadblock, does it matter anymore, or do we have a plan B? You know, and then the plan B, is it really a significant delay, or is it only a few more months extra, right? So these are kind of usually the checklist items that we go through, and it passed most of them. And in the case of Waller, you know, I think now it's been 6 months since we acquired it, and I think it's fair to say that next week, if next week's not the day, it's very close, a week or two away from the day we would get this development agreement or this term signed at City Council. We've been to 4 council meetings already with the City Council of Prairie View. We've discussed all the deal points. So this is imminent for approval. We've hashed out what they're going to give us, what the mud taxes are going to be, how much rebate the city is going to give us back. So we're actually getting a rebate from the city. We have a tax rate that we're going to levy on the subdivision, but the city for the first several years, I think 15 years, right, Steven, they're going to give us back their a good portion of their taxes they collect in exchange for us bringing this housing.
I think we should probably explain why that is, and it's a good segue into something you guys asked us about and said you wanted to talk about a little bit, and that's the concept of the MUD, MUD, which is Municipal Utility District. So bear with me here. This is going to get a little bit technical, but
we're gonna go through some of the weeds here.
Yeah, but this is super important in terms of how the deal performs from an investment standpoint. Like, this is one of the critical pieces.
But that's right.
Yeah, but it's also how Texas has been pro development for, I don't know,
in particular
Houston. Remember, and the growth in Texas has been pretty large because you got to incentivize people to come to your state and do work.
Yes,
that's exactly right. Yeah.
So in particular, Houston's way far ahead than, say, Austin with respect to MUDs. They've been doing it for 50 plus years here in Houston. It's a well-established deal, and effectively every deal in the Houston metro area has a MUD. So if you don't have one, you're immediately non-competitive. And here's why. Effectively, most of the development in Houston, again, I'm going to doesn't have to be the case, but most of the time a MUD is there to serve the function, at least the utility function of a city. And you are not in a city. So you're in unincorporated parts of a county. So the counties here do not have the right, just by law, they can't build water and sewer plants and be a purveyor of utility services. So if you're not in a city, then you don't have anybody to do that. So the MUD was a concept to create a utility district, municipal utility district. That's what it stands for. It is a political subdivision of the state. They do have an elected board and they can levy tax. And here's for the developer, why that's so important is it is those taxes that allow the MUD to issue bonds to pay back the developer for certain infrastructure. And different MUDs, depending upon how it was created and when it was created, and the language in the creation document. Generally speaking, they can pay you back for public water lines or infrastructure, sewer infrastructure, storm drainage infrastructure, and sometimes roads, and sometimes even parks. And that, again, that is all paid for via a tax that is levied only within that MUD district. So generally speaking, Prairie View is a good example that we've been talking about. We are in the process of creating this MUD. It will only affect our property. So this tax only is imposed on the property that we're developing, and therefore only to buyers within our tract. So this is disclosed. So these buyers know, and they have to sign a document saying they know they're paying this tax. But what Dharma was speaking about, and this is why some of these things take longer, is that we're negotiating with the city. Let me back up. So that tax does two basic things. It pays for the maintenance and operation of these facilities, because again, there is no city. So someone has to maintain and operate these water lines, sewer plants, water plants, etc. So the tax that we impose is broken into two basic components. That is maintenance and operations and debt service. And it is the debt service portion of the tax rate that allows, that's the only thing that is used to issue bonds and to pay back those bonds, so the developer can get reimbursed for their infrastructure. So in this case that you actually asked and Dharma was talking about in Prairie View, we're actually, part of the deal that we're getting is that we're voluntarily going to annex a portion of our tract into the incorporated limits of the city of Prairie View. Again, that's part of the deal to get water service to it without having to build a plant. So we're saving money there, millions of dollars, in theory. And in that case, a portion of a tract is already in the city and a portion is not. So we had this situation to where we needed to solve a couple of pieces of the puzzle. We wanted one unified set of rules, not three, which we would otherwise have if we weren't going to annex into the city. But as a part of that deal, and as a part of us voluntarily building and funding a new sewer treatment plant for the city, that they would give us a rebate of some of their property taxes. So in Texas, we have, again, we've harped on property taxes. They're a big deal, and they allow a lot of things and influence a lot of things, as you might imagine. So here there are three basic components. There's a city tax, a county tax, and a school district tax. And then the MUD can levy its own tax on top of that, and that's regulated by the state. It is capped. It's different in different parts of the state. Generally, it's capped at $1.50 here in the Houston metro area. In Austin, it's generally $1.20. But that also, if you're in an in-city MUD, meaning you're creating a MUD district within the incorporated limits of a city, it's the total tax rate between the city and the MUD that can't exceed that $1.50. So because the city has its own tax, that's that much less debt service tax rate that we can impose on our property, which means it's that much less reimbursement that we could get. So to solve that, we have gone to the city and said, we're going to build you all these new nice facilities. We're going to build you a plant that you can't build yourself. So you need to give us a rebate on a portion of your taxes over time. And that's the deal that we're working towards getting approved in the next couple of days. So it was a very long-winded explanation, but what Dharma was talking about the rebate, which would make no sense if you didn't have that context. So.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. So Texas is really funding private businesses to build out a lot of their infrastructure. You're talking about private building out of water lines and sewer lines that are ultimately connecting to a city or a municipal utility district.
Kind of. The private community is funding it in advance and fronting the cost. So the government, there's no out-of-pocket cost for the government. So this is the key. The government doesn't have to spend any money, period. And the risk is 100% on the developer, because the developer gets zero money until there is vertical improvements built, and they have to be built at a value and sold at a value that appraises at a value that will sustain the reimbursement of that. So it's a great model from a government standpoint, because it's its own taxing entity. They're not blamed for raising the taxes. The people buying it know full well that they're paying that tax, and they're effectively funding their own infrastructure. And we're the developers taking all the risk, because we don't get anything back until there's enough value on the ground to sustain it through the debt service portion of the tax rate.
And this is similar also, that your Hutto property, right, is that part of that development project was finished, if I remember right, we're finishing the access road or finishing the on-ramp, one or the other.
Right. Yeah,
but basically they're building a highway, and your opportunity is like, hey, you can basically develop most of or anything you want here, but you just need to finish the access road so you can get on the highway.
Build your road to get there.
A little zinger in there.
Little catch.
Yeah, but the neat thing about it is, like, they're going to allow you to, like, we've looked at the sites together and saying, hey, man, you can build this amazing industrial park here that have incredible access to a highway, for 18-wheelers to get on and off. You can really build as much of that as you want in that area because of the access point that you're going to be able to build yourself and customize it.
That's right. So that is a slightly different, well, I don't know if slightly, it is a
slightly different, but yeah, along the same lines of like government partnership.
Yeah, it's a different, and that's more of a partnership, kind of. That's what they call a public improvement district. I think a lot of states have those. They probably operate similarly, but different in certain ways. So there, unlike a MUD So if we were going to create a mud, which we're doing on the Waller piece or Prairie View piece, it's kind of crazy. This is where state law, it's a little self-serving sometimes, but we're the sole property owner. One person owns it. So, but we have to have an election to authorize bonds and to do other technical things with respect to the creation of the mud district. Well, who's going to vote? There are no voters, right? So we literally have to, we pay a company to put a trailer out there. They find a tenant, they register to vote, and we have an election cost that we have to fund so one person can go and vote to authorize this. It's kind of ridiculous.
Democracy. Democracy working.
Democracy of one person.
Yes.
But the key there is now there are board of directors, call it a city council for the mud. They're called board of directors. They are elected. And this is why cities don't like them, because they can't control the board of directors. So cities now, they don't like MUDs for this reason. Even though it's a great tool, it's happened for 50 years. I mean, are there problems from time to time? Yes, but generally speaking, it's a great tool. But they have an alternative to that called a PID, a public improvement district. The key difference there is that is a body of the city government, and the city gets to appoint those members. They are not elected. And therefore, the city effectively has control over that board of directors for a PID. But other than that, they generally operate the same way. There's some technical differences, but you levy a tax. They call it an assessment in a PID. It's not a tax, but they levy an assessment on the property, and that assessment is used to pay back bonds that are used to reimburse a developer.
So in a sense, just to add on, in the Hutto deal, Josh, well, we're going to be using these PID proceeds. We're going to get them upfront for financing some of these improvement costs, the frontage road and some of the internal bigger roads within the site. And ultimately, both of these, and that's the PID structure, the other one that he was talking about. But ultimately, these are all, like, call it financing, municipal financing mechanisms, right? Other than your regular debt and equity, which get paid back via a small tax rate on the property over 30 years, right? So it's a more effective way, and it's a very good third option or fourth option of capital in times like these for us as developers to manage our entire stack, right?
Cool. So right now, I mean, you guys are mainly operating between Houston and Austin, right? So within that stretch right there, how many projects you say you're like working on at one time, and how many are in the works that you're like, okay, we're looking at this stuff and hopefully maybe we can get something, or, that kind of investigative standpoint?
We own about 15, and we have one under contract right now.
Yeah.
So, and then we're looking at other opportunities that come along, but.
Dharma, can you elaborate more on this? Use a term that Dave and I use a lot, which is being the path of progress. We love that term, and that's why we're in the Southeast, and why we also love Texas. Texas is probably one of the few states in the country that's actively building highways.
Wait, we love Texas? Josh loves Texas.
Should we take a moment?
The state, not the school.
So, talking about this path of progress, Texas is one of the few states in the entire country that's building highways. Like, you don't go very many places. Like I was in Pittsburgh a couple of weeks ago. There were new highways being built in Pittsburgh. Yeah. So, when you're looking at a site, I believe, and if I'm recalling this wrong, correct me, but you saw the opportunity for the Samsung plant to basically go where it's going before before it was there. You said, listen, I'm going to take a bet here. I'm going to buy all the land surrounding this big parcel that's along a highway and that they can build a highway to. How did you, give us some insight, how you see these things and how you bet on the path of progress in the areas that you're in?
Well, I mean, so I think generally speaking, I think all of it boils down to really being, nose to the ground, pedal to metal, right? You just drive, you're driving, getting a feel, getting a sense of how the area is shaping up. You're reading, you're you're kind of in regular contact with economic development corporations of each, the cities and the counties have an economic development corporation wing associated to them that's generally sits at an arm's length distance or sits as a private entity outside the city or the county. And they're always evaluating opportunities with potential companies, employment, jobs coming into the region. So I think we, as a policy, stay very close to EDCs to understand, what growth is coming to the area. So that definitely helps us try to get ahead of some of this, and that also shows us which pockets are coming into, what the expansion plans for the roads are, what sort of what sort of residential developments are coming in. But I think other than that, you're also just kind of constantly in the industry, in talks with people, your colleagues, and getting a pulse. After a certain point of doing this, you just get a general pulse of what would be the right way in which an area might expand. For instance, a specific area, maybe a few thousand acres of free open land, but it all may be gravitating toward a major freeway. It all may be gravitating toward a major center of employment. So, whether it's a small or large roads, or even just empty land between that major freeway and that large center of employment, I think would be seen, as a spot that we need to focus on, versus the other side where it's going to nowhere, right? So I think it's really crucial first to hone into the specific area, the city, the state, the county, submarket, and then also within the tract or very small micro region, you're trying to look at, which side of the fence do I want to be on, right? Do I want to be closer to the freeway? Do I want to be closer to the other side? And there's no right or wrong answer. It all comes down to, I think, what your strategy is, right? If you're just buying larger acreage to do residential master plans like us, you can be almost anywhere. But of course, now you have to worry about, where is the closest utilities? Is there possibly a line close by? And how long do I have to drag that out? Or do I have to do all my utilities? So now you start coming into the more local aspects of development, right? So you first start with path of progress, city, state, region, submarket, then you move into infrastructure plans, EDCs, and then you kind of look at your, development potential and what you need to do on your property, right? So,
and we don't want to overlook the obvious. So, housing is pretty easy for most people to understand. Is it an area that people want to live in? And so, one thing that we haven't talked about is the school districts within which these tracts lie, particularly on a housing front, is a key driver. Not all districts are equal. Some are more desirable than others. And that is shown time and time again through sales pace and average sales price in homes, right? And competition. So districts and growing districts, underutilized districts, and again, proximity to everyday things like employment centers, freeways, access, grocery stores. You can build something out in the middle of nowhere, but if they have to drive 30 minutes to go to a grocery store, that might be an issue. It may not be. If you're going after pure value, that buyer segment, they buy where they have to or where they can, so it just depends. I mean, all those things are important. On industrial, it's, what's the distribution network and how can you get access to and from, and at the end of the day, we have customers too, I guess is what I'm saying. No matter,
are the main things you guys are looking at? You're looking at residential and industrial sites. Is that the kind of the two things that you could put out there right now?
I think we look at land as the platform, right? It's how do you, when you buy raw and untitled land and you entitle it for its highest and best use, I think 80% of the time we're going to go after doing a horizontal development for a residential subdivision. Every once in a while, I think when we see an opportunistic buy, something like what played out in the Samsung, Taylor, Austin, pocket, there's just an opportunity to jump on it because we could do a residential development on that piece of property. We can also do an industrial park. An industrial park would pay you high singles to double digits per square foot. Residential development would pay you mid-single digits per square foot on the value of the dirt. So what is the highest and best use? And having both options just helps us stay present in that area. So I think generally speaking, when we're going out to search for tracts of land to buy, we have a residential master plan community or a subdivision in mind. It's just, once in a while they turn into opportunistic industrial plays or other uses. So that's the way.
Cool. Cool. All right, guys. Well, we really appreciate it. That's a lot of insight into all the projects you're working on, and it's pretty cool to see just a little bit different how Texas is doing stuff and what the pipeline looks like out there. So
yeah, we really appreciate the time. We look forward to doing some more deals together. Look forward to seeing the progress on Waller, and thanks for the time, guys.
All right. Well,
likewise.
Hopefully we didn't
Really
bore you
appreciate
to death
everything
with a
you
bunch
guys-
of details there.
no, all good. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.